Does anyone remember this children's show? It was called Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7 years old. I never saw any mention of it anywhere, so I assume it was on a local station in 1971 or 1972. I don't remember which station it was on, but I do recall it airing at an odd hour, like 4:00 p.m. I was 9 years old when I grew up outside of Ashland in 72 Candle Cove, and I remember a pirate marionette at the entrance of a cave talking to a young girl. I'm not crazy, but I do remember Pirate Percy, and I was always a little afraid of him because he appeared to be made from pieces of other dolls, like a really cheap doll. I'm sorry to bring up this old subject, but I know precisely what show you mean. His head was an old porcelain baby doll that looked like an antique and didn't belong on the body. I can't recall what station this was, but I don't think it was WTF. Shale of the Sky, I believe Candle Cove ran for only a few months in 71, not 72. I was 12 years old when I watched it a few times with my brother. It was on Channel 58, whatever station my mother would let me switch to after the news. From what I recall, it was about a young girl who thought she would be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was named the Laughingstock, and the pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared easily. I can't remember the girl's name, Janice, Jade, or something, but I believe it was Janice. Thank you, Jiren. I particularly recall how startling it was when they changed from the wooden, plastic-like model to the foam puppet version of the talking head. I believe I also recall that. Oh, Mike, do you remember this part? The ship's bow was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged, giving the impression that it was swallowing the sea. It had that terrible Edwin voice and laugh. The ship always told Percy that he had to enter a spooky place, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was, and the camera would zoom in on his laughing face with each pause. Stock's 2 eyes, skew, flopping foam jaw, and the fishing line that opened and closed it just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain, who had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above like a really, really tall narrow teeth. I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Barry. So I got to relax while reading that. When the episode was on Nightmare Fuel, I was around 5 years old, and the villain's sidekick was the puppet with the mustache, not the villain. I used to assume that Horace had only one eye because he had a monocle on top of his mustache, but it turns out that the villain was actually another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they allowed us to see in those days. When Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker, appeared, I was genuinely unable to look at the television because he appeared out of nowhere on his strings. He was a filthy skeleton with a cap and brown top hat, and his eyes were too large for his skull. What sort of kid show were we watching? Christ almighty, wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up like crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin? Yeah, I think so. Remember, his mouth didn't open and Klaus's jaw just kind of slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why did your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said to grind your skin. Oh, I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces and they were just like screaming, and the puppets marionette were flailing spastically, and just like all screaming, the girl was just moaning and crying like she'd been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it. I don't think that was a dream. I remember that was an episode. Not possible. That there was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show. Maybe I'm manufacturing a memory because you said that, but I swear to God I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed. Oh my God, yes, the little girl Janice. I remember seeing her shake and the Skin Taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw cutting so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and that was the last time I ever watched it. I ran to tell my brother and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. Hey, I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was a little kid in the early 70s when I was 8 or 9 if she remembered a kid show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said because I used to think it was so strange that you said, "I'm going to go watch Candle Cove now, Mom," and then you would tune the TV to static and Just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. An envelope on a bus headed for Chicago contained the following information. It all started with a reading of the will. My mother, my only surviving parent, had died of a heart attack in her New England home. Her body was discovered by one of the women who came to clean every few days, and the news had not come as a shock to any of the family because she had had 2 previous heart attacks and was not in the best of health due to her drinking and smoking. It was surprising that she wanted me to have the old family home, even though I never really loved it. I mean, I moved out as soon as I could, and I honestly hadn't been expecting to get anything in. The will that was given, how long it had been since we'd even spoken. I was surprised she hadn't written me out. You know, the way that she tried to write me out of the family's history by removing any picture of me from the house. Certainly didn't plan to keep the creepy rundown old place. But at the same time I knew that there was a chance I could fetch a bit of cash in the market if someone put a little work into it. You fix it up, and as I was currently between jobs, it might be a worthwhile use of my time. So you know, I got my brother or cousin, they all came over and they were helping fix it up. You know, they happily agreed to. There actually wasn't as much work to do as I had first thought, as the house seemed to be in better repair than I remembered it being. I guess my mother, cheap as she was, had still finally been forced to actually get someone to fix up some of the bigger problems to the house. Was little stuff that needed repair and a new coat of paint, but it only ended up taking about a week or so. In the end, it was during that time that I first found it. I don't have the best memories of the old place, given how long it had been since I stayed there. But one of the first things I noticed while I was walking along the ground floor hallway was that there was a door that hadn't been there before. Stared at it for a few moments, more out of confusion than anything else, before trying to push it open. Would budge an inch. Asked my brother if he knew what might be down there, and he shook his head, saying that he'd not even noticed it before now. My cousin said that she'd noticed a big old-fashioned looking key in the keyhole of the door the last time she'd come around to visit, but she had no clue where it might be right now. I shrugged, not really thinking much of it at the time, just figuring I'd have to get someone to bust the door down at some point before I got the house sold. Now the room that none of us wanted to go in was Emerson's. It was weird, you know, seeing all his old toys and coloring books still there, as if our mother had been trying to bring her son back by clinging on to the past. Emerson had always been our mother's favorite, the one who she lavished all of her attention on. I saw that she stuck his drawings up all over the place, drawings of pirate ships, odd comical looking figures with these strange designs. My brother informed me that even after he had stayed for dinner, our mother would continually make reservations for Emerson, as like she was still expecting him to arrive unexpectedly. I've been missing him for years. The first night I spent alone in the house, I didn't sleep very well. Crazy as it sounds, I kept thinking that I heard noises in the house, people talking to each other. I must have checked each and every one of the rooms a dozen times, only to find each and every one of them empty. I even checked to see if I'd left the TV on, but it was still unplugged. I'd go back to bed, and then after a little while the noises would start up again. Sometimes I was sure I could hear music. Well, it's around 4 in the morning. A thought occurred to me, and I went to the locked door in the hallway, pressing my ear against it and listening closely. I was sure I heard what sounded like a muffled tune coming from within. The next day, I went into town to buy some food, and after the events of last night, I also bought a hammer to knock that old door down. It was while chatting with the cashier that I learned something unsettling about the neighborhood that I temporarily moved into. I casually brought up where I was staying after he commented on me being new around here, and I told him I was planning to try and sell up. He let out a short burst of laughter before looking embarrassed about it, and when I asked him to explain, he said the following: no one with sense is going to buy that dump. No one with half a brain would buy any house within 10 miles of that place, he said, not looking up from the groceries he had packed away. Why not? Seems like a nice enough neighborhood, I replied. Oh, because all them kids going missing. Of course. You go on to explain, for the past few years there have been a sudden and disturbing rise in the number of children vanishing from their homes in the area. There have been search parties formed, the police, the FBI, they got involved, but nothing turned up. The kids had vanished from their homes with no signs of forced entry or struggle, and no evidence left behind as to who might have been responsible. People were trying to move away as fast as possible, but there were few who would buy a house in the area once they heard about what was going on. No one wanted to move to a place where a child kidnapper or killer was active. I have to admit, the story kind of creeped me out. Knowing that something so strange was going on near where I was staying made the odd going on of the previous night seem even more unsettling to me. And so as soon as I got home, I decided to bust that door down, and my neighbor, a fairly nice young woman named Charlie, who I had gotten to know, was working on her home's front lawn when I got back and noticed the hammer in my hand as I headed towards that front door of my home. Not really wanting to be alone when I broke the door down, I gave her an abridged version of the events, leaving out the odd noises of last night, that is, and asked if she'd like to join me in finding out what was in the room. Mysterious locked door, very Scooby-Doo, she said as I grinned. Sure, I'll be Fred, you be Daphne, I replied, happy to have someone with me. Her presence making the nervousness I had felt while listening to the cashier. Believe me, I'm more VMA than Daphne, but the story is starting to wane a bit. After entering the house, I put away the various groceries and made drinks for Charlie and myself before we went to the white door. It only took a few hammer swings to smash and open the lock beneath the assault, and the door swung open to reveal a darkened basement below. I was certain that our house didn't have a basement, but all of a sudden, I seemed to remember playing with Emerson once, challenging him to go down into the dark. Emerson had always been afraid of almost everything, and I, like older brothers everywhere, had taken far too much pleasure in torturing him. We seemed to remember me standing at the top of the staircase, me challenging him to go down into the dark while calling him a chicken. With the hammer still firmly grasped in my hands, I started to descend the ancient creaking stairs into the basement after telling him, "You have to go inside, Charlie." As we arrived at the foot of the steps, I knew that having something that may cause some harm made me feel better, even if I had no idea what we would discover. After a few moments, Charlie felt around for a light switch and found one. He flicked it on, and the room was quickly lighted, exposing what was inside. "Oh my God, look at all this amazing stuff!" Charlie exclaimed. The basement was full of puppets. Dozens of them were arranged in different shelves, all in pristine condition as if they had just been purchased. There were puppets of all shapes and sizes, some of which were very human-like, others of which were puppet-like animals, and still others that were more monstrous. There were also props from what appeared to be kid show sets, but none of them had any dust on them, as if someone had just gone down to clean up. Charlie inquired while she was picking up one of the puppets, a man with a huge mustache and a monocle over one eye. She smiled and played with him, moving his limbs up and down. My brother used to be a part of a children's show called Pirate Place or something, I believe, but it only ran for a few years before it was cancelled, so I assumed that all of the old puppets and sets from the show were there. I said as we looked around the room. My eyes fell on a creepy-looking skeleton puppet with a real weird mouth, a top hat upon his head. Ugly-looking thing. I thought to myself that moment, no way. Do you have any idea how much some of this stuff might be worth? Collectors pay a fortune for things like this on eBay, Charlie said, setting the puppet down gently on one of the shelves. I glanced around at the rest of the contents of the room. Apart from the puppets and set pieces, there was an old sewing machine set on a desk that was otherwise completely bare. There was no sign of anything that could have been the source of the tune that I had heard before, deciding that I must have imagined it, probably due to lack of sleep and being back in the old place. I did my best to forget about my fears and concentrate on the opportunity before me. Now it was just one thing that troubled me as I looked around on the desk the sewing machine was set on. There were several odd red stains spattered over it. As I stared at them, I was sure out of the corner of my eye that the odd-looking skeleton puppet's head twitched in my direction. The next few days went by without anything odd happening. Really, I put the puppets when a couple came to visit the house on eBay. The only oddity was that the husband's face lost all of its color when he saw the skeleton puppet. He went to the car, started it, and sat there until his wife joined them after he apologized for being rude, and the two of them simply drove away. Later that night, I was certain I heard the old sewing machine in the basement, so I went down to check while simultaneously staring at the darkened doorway. The sudden noise nearly made me jump out of my skin. My head jerked to the side toward the source of the noise, and I took a moment to examine my nerves. I cautiously opened the door and saw Charlie standing there, and she said, "We need to talk." She explained that she had told a friend about the find in the basement a few days prior, and when she had mentioned the name Pirate Place, he had gone silent and asked her to describe the puppets. He looked scared, and she said, as if I'd seen a ghost, and he told her to move house and away from those damn things. He mentioned the puppets, becoming more and more hysterical as the conversation continued, and repeatedly stated that it wasn't safe to be around them because they could see you through them. He would talk endlessly about the signal and bodily avatars, none of which made sense to her. Apparently, he had worked in television and knew my brother. He claimed to have met Emerson in the script room and then to have sworn about knowing where the stories were. Originated from Charlie claimed that she had never seen him like this before, that he appeared to be nearly insane, with his eyes out of his head and his face dripping with perspiration. She had been afraid that he was going to attack, and she asked me if your brother had been involved in anything strange. I honestly wasn't sure how to react to that. Emerson had always been a strange child, no question about that, but I couldn't imagine him ever making anyone feel so afraid, much less an adult. When I asked if he had explained why the puppets were so terrible, she shrugged and said that it wasn't the puppets, but rather what made them. He then got up and said he couldn't be in my house any longer, ran outside to his car, and drove away. I thought that since she had shared her weirdness with me, perhaps I could also share some of the weirdness in my life at the moment. After explaining the strange noises, the music, and the sewing machine that seemed to turn on its own against my better judgment, we made the decision to go down into the dark basement once more. I'm not sure what I expected to find, but I was certain that something was wrong, so when we saw that nothing seemed to have changed or been moved, I kind of felt disappointed. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going crazy, so I took one last look back into the darkness and saw that there was light coming from somewhere, not very bright, but a light source moving quickly. We pushed aside one of the puppet shelves and felt along the wall behind it to confirm what Charlie had thought was a door. This was all Scooby-Doo, I tell you. Charlie replied with a smile on her face, obviously having fun. I grinned, something I couldn't have done without her presence, so it was good to have someone to share this insanity with. We went along the wall trying to find some way to open the door, some handle or switch to make it open from behind it. I was sure that I could hear something. It sounded almost like music, circus music, a cheerful upbeat tune, but also of somehow as if there was something not quite right about it. Out of the corner of my eye I was sure that the puppet with the ridiculous mustache and monocle had moved, and I realize how ridiculous that sounds, but I was certain of it. It was just the tiniest movement, twitch of its head towards the skeleton puppet as if waiting for orders. I thought to myself, then I was wondering why that thought even popped into my head. With a bit of work we managed to trip away the wallpaper that was covering most of the door, revealing that it was bright red in color, the paint chipped and flaked in places with a small keyhole, no handle. I assumed that it just pushed inwards once unlocked, or perhaps slid to the side as there was no place for a handle to have once been either. It was then that I noticed Charlie had stopped smiling. In fact, she was just staring at the door with what looked like a mix of confusion, fear, taking a few steps back from it. When I asked her what was wrong, she shook her head and made excuses to leave. I asked her if she was all right. She told me she was tired, promised to help me try and find the key to the door in the morning. It was getting late, so it was plausible enough, but I knew that something was wrong here. For the rest of the evening I looked through Emerson's old things in his room, looking for some clue perhaps as to what it was that had inspired such fear in Charlie's friend. For the most part it was old toys, childhood drawings, nothing much of use. There were a few things that were odd though. There's a picture that I guess Emerson had done when he was little. There was a crude drawing of a boy in his bed that I think was meant to be Emerson himself. Around him stood several figures. One was just a stick figure with a hat on its head, another was a portly man with a cartoonish mustache and teeth, and there was a third that was very odd. It was just a scribble on the outline of a person, a black shadowy scribble. It was a circle drawn above the three figures, and the boy and lines were shown coming down from it, leading to the boy's head for some reason. Looking at those lines, the words tendrils came to mind. There was a picture of a red door. Other words, where they take them, was scrolled in large letters beneath it. The final picture was of the stick man and the man with a mustache, leading several smaller figures towards a third. Now this one was a woman, whether a rather well-drawn one in comparison to the crude basic nature of the others, except for the face. The face was just two dots for eyes and a line for a mouth. The words, where they take them, was written here as music. Charlie left a message on my answering machine the following day, saying that she had gone to stay with her girlfriend for a few days to get her mind straight and to apologize for leaving so abruptly the night before. Her voice sounded strange, almost shaky, and she said not to worry about the door. She tried to sound calm and casual, but there was fear in her voice as she said that it would probably be best to forget about the whole thing and just cover up the basement and not even mention it to the potential buyers of the house. She also suggested that it would be a good idea to remove the puppets from eBay, which I really should have done if she had asked. Instead, I spent the rest of the day searching the house for the key to that door, but I searched everywhere without much luck. Almost at random, I decided to look in Emerson's room more thoroughly, and there was a key hidden in one of his old pillowcases. I took a drink to calm down. When I sat down to watch TV, I recalled that the old device never picked up much when we were young and that the channels were constantly filled with static. At least now, it seemed to be functioning better. The news then announced another disappearance in the area, this time involving a girl who disappeared from her home in the middle of the night. I browsed the channels in search of something a little less gloomy. I got up, finished my drink, and walked down the stairs into the basement, walking confidently toward WS and the door, ready to open. It was a hideous thing, with a terrible, misshapen mouth that looked terrible. I don't know why the prop designer made it look that way, but at that moment, the words "to grind your skin" came to mind. I put the key into the door, and sure enough, it unlocked it. I knew I hadn't moved the skeleton puppet, and neither Charlie nor the other puppets had their heads turned towards it, as if they were waiting for it to do something to make me say something. My God. The interior was revealed by the door smoothly pushing inward. Beyond it, a single filthy light bulb made the room's contents visible. Dear Lord. The only thing worse than the stench was the sight of the children's shoes and clothes, some of which were strewn with old dried blood and piled in a heap in one corner of the room, which was the floorboards. When I walked in, I noticed that one of the large red patches on the floorboards was still somewhat fresh and sticky, like soda spilled on a movie theater floor. The room smelled of spoiled meat and burnt hair, and I had to force myself not to throw up. I wondered how the smell hadn't spread from this room to the basement. In one corner of the room is a stack of old video cassettes that are labeled with things like Emerson's first bike ride and his first spelling bee. These tapes are probably old home movies, but some of them also have recordings that say Candle Cove Episode 4 and Season 3 pilot episode. I picked up a few and noticed that there were bloody fingerprints on several. There's a series of steps leading down further into the blackness in the rear of the room, and I felt oddly compelled to go down there. How far down did this go? How is this even here beneath my family home without me ever knowing it? And yet I felt like I did know about it looking at those steps. I felt like I remembered being in this room before I was a child, and it had been empty then, and there I stood with Emerson. At the foot of those stairs, "Emerson, you have to go inside," I whispered to him, taking delight in how terrified he looked. He had gone down into the dark, and in my head throbbed with pain. It actually physically hurt to try to remember, as if something was willing me not to. Had there been someone down there with us? I was sure I remembered there being someone in the room besides the two of us. The more I thought about it, our mother, no, not our mother, but another woman. My good, couldn't I remember her face? I began to take unsteady steps down the stairs. The more I walked, the closer I got to another door, another red door. The key fit the lock of this one as well, and it opened with ease. It was music coming from within now, and sound of waves crashing against the shore. I felt it pulling me towards it, calling me in like a siren song. I had to go inside. I thought to myself, I had to go inside. I wasn't alone in this room. I burned all the puppets later that night. Not that I imagined it matters. They been destroyed before, and it hadn't stopped them from coming back. They're just wood and paint and cloth, nothing but a conduit. They allowed them to come through, allowed them to walk through the door and come here. Oh God, the door. I know where they go now. I know where they go. Oh, cry out, Jesus, please. I know where they go. I saw it. They took me there. That the way they took my brother when he was a child. They need us. I don't know why they need us, but they need us, and that's what he said through that horrible misshapen mouth, those eyes rolling in his sockets wildly. They needed my brother, and they needed me, and my family isn't safe. The tail and the signal both depend on us. That the ship came to the cave. Emerson was laughing and crying at the same time as he spoke. The words I knew were coming as he told me what I had to do. It was waiting for me. I saw the irony. You may think me a coward for not helping them, not even trying to save them, but I know where the ship is taking them now. I know where the voyage leads. I know who was waiting at the end. I pray to God, but I know that it'll do no good. I know now. I know things that no one should ever know. I know that Emerson learned that day the signal found him. I know what Emerson learned the day the signal found him. I know the things he learned in that dark place where the music comes from. Music played on instruments crafted of bone and organs wrapped in flesh. It's always there now in my head, playing in an endless loop. The signals found me like it found Emerson that day. I made him go down those stairs like it found our mother. I know why she did what she did. I know what she knew, and I know where Emerson is. I saw him. I saw him on the ship. My God, the ship. The laughing was the worst. I wish it would stop laughing. Sealed up the basement. But I know that one day someone will go down there again. I wrote this so that when they discover the things I know they'll find down there, they'll know neither I nor my mother were responsible, perhaps, so they'll have the courage to do what I don't, and they can destroy this terrible place. They could burn it to the ground. The only thing holding me back is the Fear that maybe this isn't just the door to their cage, but the cage itself. I mean, if the house were to be destroyed, maybe they'd be able to spread. I want to apologize to my family, and I hope they'll understand. If this reaches you, brother, please don't go inside that house, don't sell it, don't board it up, and let it stand forgotten. It's a creepy old building for people to stare at, and perhaps that will hold them back. At least the sewing machine is running around the clock now, and I know it's him sewing himself new additions to that awful cape. You see, she lets me keep the skin. I'm so sorry, Emerson. I wish I could help you or at least put an end to what you did, but I don't hate you for it. You're free of your suffering. I'm aware that they won't let you sleep and that you can't be free of them just yet, but occasionally I get a glimpse of them from the corner of my eye, and I know that they're going to take me to the ship. I refuse to let them go, and I'll choose to search for and bring my corpse away in a beautiful, hopeful manner far from where they can never find it. This note was discovered next to a VHS film, which turned out to be nothing more than static, although viewers claimed to feel queasy and sick after trying to watch it. When the Grimes home was searched, the possessions of more than 23 children who had vanished in the neighborhood were found. No signs of the children themselves were found inside or close to the house, but the basement and the hidden room were exactly as the letter had described them, and there were no stairs leading to a second sub-basement or anywhere else on the property. The puppets also seemed to be in perfect condition, even though it was claimed that they had been burned. The cassettes that were referenced in the letter were absent. Since then, the Grimes house has been occupied by 2 families, neither of which stayed for more than a few months. They reported peculiar noises and odors coming from the house, as well as missing items. The house is now empty after being bought and then left empty by Adrian Grimes in early 2011. The puppets and set pieces of Candle Cove were mistakenly named Pirate Place by Grimes in a letter, an early working title for the show that Emerson Grimes later abandoned, supposedly vanished shortly before Adrian Grimes made the purchase, and one woman reported feeling something terrible in the basement. Her children also spoke of having terrible dreams about a ship that would be taking them away, and the bony man from the TV watching them at night. Hello, kids, this is me. Thank you so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's podcast episode. Mr. K Pasta and I wanted to say, I know I haven't had as many updates on the channel lately, and things have been really difficult with __ that's happening to my family, but I still wanted to say thank you so much for being there, for continuing to support me, and for returning to hear new stories. Please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell if you would like to receive updates whenever I upload. If you're listening to a podcast, I believe the button is still a subscribe button, follow button, or whatever it may be. As always, I want to express my gratitude to everyone on patreon.com. Pasta with Cray, a huge thank you to everyone there, especially Jordan, who is humble. King Crab CR 420, Diana Kraus, Veronica Lai Lopez March. Chavez Ale 66603 Prospect X, Ethan Leon Polaris Vice of Blake Rattler Royce Disdain, a foolish man who is a devotee of Salmar Lynn Mendoza, Brandon Chaos and Brimstone Kuna. This is William Wellington, the Janner. BR Crow L, Canales Grins, the Psychopathic Dante, Consim Bloody Cade. Primark M, Mojo C, Pox Jed is amiable. In my opinion, JK Mike Crusader, Jerry Remember the Sun, Chocobo EST Second Time, Bean Hour, Minute Keep Salty Food Away. Shadow of Red Turtle Man Cat Mr. Marcus Blitz, Sans Voice Fell Melted. Lake T, Sue Cronet, Struck by 509, a nephew of Freddy Krueger was born. The Acid System of Tommy Walters, The Sky Harbor, Nick Kyle, The Ginger Brothers Rat is bombed by Tristan Pelton. Daniel Son Andy, thanks to everyone who is down in the description and who is able to donate simply $1. I would want to express my gratitude to every one of you, and if you would like to be added to this list, please visit music in the description.